This is episode 76 of the Fire Protection Podcast, powered by Inspect Point. Today, my guest is Jeff Pirro. Jeff actually works for Inspect Point here. He's one of our lead sales account executives and been with us for almost 4 years now. And I've wanted to have Jeff on for a while now. Just haven't been able to arrange it. But Jeff came to us. He's been a volunteer firefighter for 10 to 12 years. And weirdly enough, he was already in software sales in the upstate New York region. And it just came together, right? Where he came on to us and almost 4 years ago and really learned our product and brought a lot of that firefighting knowledge into our team, right? And that's been a big part. But he also has a deep connection to firefighting and now fire protection. And he really talked about the synergies there and how close-knit our industry is, right? From the first responders to fire protection companies. And a lot of the fire protection companies that we work with or are in the industry are also in the fire service side. So we got into a variety of topics. Jeff is great to talk to. He has a lot of great stories. So I did want him to highlight Jeff and kind of ode to his service within his volunteer firefighting up there. So again, episode 76 and on to the podcast here. Thanks again for all the likes and subscribes. Jeff, what is happening this morning?
Not much, Drew. Just looking forward to this podcast.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming here. I know. I've wanted to do this for a while. It's just stuff, life and work gets in the way, right?
Yeah. I appreciate you considering me, and honestly, just kudos to you. And I mean it genuinely. This is just a very unique thing in this particular market. You've done a great job with it. I've never worked for a company that had its own podcast, and you were one of the early adopters. So, I mean, just even being on here is an honor, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's, I appreciate that. Pat and I had the idea, it's 5 years, I think, and maybe it's even more. Yeah, 5 years ago, I think. And it was like, all right, we listen to podcasts, we listen to comedy podcasts, or I listen to a lot of golf podcasts and business and whatever's going on in the world, right? But there wasn't really any, Chris Logan does a great job with the sprinkler one. And I think it's, we all have our daily jobs, and I don't necessarily want to talk about that. And it's like, all right, let's talk about, I want to bring on people that, obviously have respect within the fire industry and just, we go to these conferences all over the U.S. and maybe one time a year you get to hear, your mentor, like a James Gallenvo speak or, Jim Pauly at NFPA speak. But if the podcast, you can connect like weekly or monthly with people, right? By just listening.
Yeah. And people like a conversation. The long form format in podcasting has obviously been the route people go. And, I think you've hit the right notes.
Yeah. Appreciate that. So, I know you pretty well, Jeff. Let's let the listeners know who Jeff Pirro is, how you got your start and, what you're all about.
Yeah, appreciate that. Well, one thing to know, I'm the son of a 30-year career firefighter who retired about 10 years ago in the town I grew up in of Utica, New York. Went to college in some form or shape, been in communications and sales for about 20 years. Been a volunteer firefighter at the DeFreestville Fire Department for 10, now a lieutenant, and I've been here for 4, and all of those have along the way informed how I'm able to talk about not only this particular market or industry, but fire protection in general, specifically as it relates to people that I talk to for work on a regular basis, which are fire protection contractors, because of course, Inspect Point is the software that they're considering or using.
Yep. Yeah. So let's go way back. Your father was a firefighter out in Utica. What did you have any memories of that? Like,
oh, yeah, a ton. Yeah, I mean, some of my earliest memories of my dad for Fire Prevention Week, which takes place in October, usually I think it's the first or the second week of October. He
Yep.
used to come to our school, Our Lady of Lourdes, and he'd show up with the mayor, and they would do a presentation, and they would sit, and that was always cool because then you'd see the big red truck, right? I can
Yeah.
remember times that we spent Thanksgivings and Christmases there on shift with him because the station he was mainly at throughout his career was right around the corner from where we lived.
Yep.
So he'd drive maybe a half mile, and we'd go down. And I mean, Drew, I don't know if you've ever had a firefighter cook for you, but
Oh, I have.
yeah, dude, I mean, you're talking chef level meals, right? I mean, and a little shout out, these guys, a lot of them were also Italian, or if you grew up in Utica, like you're almost Italian by default. That's how the type of city it was. But we've spent some Thanksgivings and Christmases at the fire department. I remember every year they'd have a Christmas party. In fact, in his fire department specifically, Station 3 on Arthur Ave in Utica, they still had a pole that they had only decommissioned by the time I was like young enough to remember it. But they used to let us slide down the fire pole. You'd wrap your legs around and go from the first to the second floor. Yeah, and then you'd get down to the bottom, and they had this old RC Cola. like
It's
it was
machine.
just a lot. Yeah, and he'd come up and visit, or one of the specific memories I have is I woke up. So I delivered newspapers as a kid. It was my first job. My parents insisted I get a job. I was like, I forget, 11 or 12. I mean, it was around that age. And I did that for a number of years. We woke up and heard a big explosion. We didn't know it was an explosion. It sounded like a piece of furniture falling on the ground. Long story short, my dad was heading to work as that happened. And when we went outside, a house down the street had a gas leak in the basement.
Yep.
They did not know, of course, they did not have CO detectors. They did not have the appropriate tools that would have warned them. So what happened was the basement fills with natural gas, and then and it was like in the really like the end of winter, and the boiler kicks on. I mean, it's how saturated it was. That little flame from the boiler, they eventually found out, or through the investigation, discovered that the boiler kicked on. Unfortunately, that particular event didn't turn out the best it could have
Yeah.
for folks. But I saw my dad in action, and that's just always been something that's been in my mind, like it is for a lot of the guys I talk to. I mean, we have a lot of firefighters that do side work. Some of them are doing fire alarms. A lot of them do extinguishers. Extinguishers, kitchen hoods tends to be the model of choice for the firefighters because they may be active still, and they have different schedules, whether it's 1 on 3 off or 2 on 2 off, and a number of different constructions. So they'll inspect extinguishers, kitchen hoods, things like that. That's an excellent business market for them to get into.
Yep.
But so that sort of public service mind has always been there because my dad went off to work, and my mother, she was a stay-at-home mom. Just give her a little shout out. I mean, it's not like she didn't do anything. She was a stay-at-home mom raising 3 boys. She eventually went off to become a biller at a nonprofit, and she would collect record amounts of money on behalf of the patients.
Right.
Where she worked, and so that's sort of the background.
Yeah. You say that, I've been involved in fire protection, not on the firefighting side, but obviously been tied to that with just working in New York City and the FDNY, and back to like one of the best meals I've ever had. Friends of firefighters brought me to Ladder 10 one year, my wife and I, and Ladder 10 is the firehouse where World Trade Center's at.
Oh yeah.
And had all the action, and oh man, it was one of the most, I don't know, it was just emotional places to be, but
sure.
And the stories they had and everything, but the food was incredible. And it was just a regular night, right? They're just making Italian, obviously. That night, and I don't know. It's just I never experienced anything like that. So it's kind of one of the highlights of my career is just being able to go there and hearing the stories around 9/11 and all that. So
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you, probably the best memory I have with my dad, just to give a shout out here, um, isn't from when I was a kid. It was from after I become a volunteer firefighter for a number of years. Took place about 8 years ago. We were at a diner up in Half Moon Diner, and it's me and my dad, my brother, his family. So it was like 6 to 8 of us, and we're sitting at a table, and a guy next to us, World War II veteran, in a wheelchair, mechanical mobile wheelchair, is eating with a couple of people, and all of a sudden he starts to choke, and through that process, we realized not only was he choking, but then he had a heart attack. So we had to get him
oh
on the
no,
ground. My father's the one that put him on the ground. I did chest compressions while he did rescue breaths.
wow,
And I say that's a good memory, one, because I had heard through the grapevine later on that even as a 92-year-old, he had survived when the fire
wow,
department showed up. Yeah, so, if I can give a little plug for that, just, that was an amazing experience. But two things out of that. One, um, I know for the podcast, for anybody watching, they're interested in fire protection. They're probably fire protection contractors or in the industry. Many of them are probably firefighters or have family who are. But if you have
yep,
ever thought about joining the volunteer fire service, we have a critical need for volunteer firefighters. Here in New York State, we have a website called fireandU.org. You can go and visit. But anywhere else, uh, volunteer firefighters are absolutely critical and necessary to the protection of communities where they can't afford or don't have
yep,
enough municipalities to justify a paid department. Of course, I'm lucky enough to live in a town where we have a paid department and then also volunteer in the town next door.
yep,
But without that training, without that regular behavior of knowing CPR, and I've been around people who've done the Heimlich maneuver for other folks at restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. Um, it's just a critical and important skill, and it's an important part of a community. So anybody who's ever thought about volunteer firefighting, there's a role for everybody.
yep,
You don't have to be a big, strong, axe wielding, person carrying a hose you
yep,
can do a number of other things. There are things outside, hitting hydrants. There are support functions that we need. There's fire police who keep the scene safe,
yep,
so a little shout out for that the experience I had as a firefighter allowed me at one point to do something pretty amazing with my father. But that only came because I chose to be a volunteer firefighter. And I
yep.
would encourage anybody who's thinking about it to really consider, just Google, talk to your local fire department. They probably have a Facebook page or some other way to contact them, but it's a critical need.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Obviously, get involved, and I've actually thought about doing it myself here locally. Just knowing people from the industry. Going back to my Stillwater, New York days, and Jeff Mahar was the chief. His son was my age, and I knew him my entire childhood, right? But then I grow older. He works for the biggest fire sprinkler company in Albany, in upstate New York, right? So I'm like, oh man, there's this tie from the firefighting and volunteer to the actual fire protection community, and I don't know. I've never seen that in any other industry where, I don't know. It's giving back, and Jason Webb, who I just had on, he's obviously big into that, and John Johnson, who John's been a variety of companies in the industry. I think he's at Comtech now, but even Chris Logan, the fellow podcaster, right? He does, he's a volunteer firefighter himself and owns a fire protection company up in Canada. So,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
And I'll tell you, more to your point, just to build off of that, right? These skills that you learn coming into the volunteer or paid fire service aren't only specific to the fire service, right? So obviously, in part, when I interviewed with you and Pat for Inspect Point, in part that was important because there was an experience with fire protection that informed. Likewise, in the reverse, General Electric, formerly headquartered out of Schenectady, New York, still has a presence there. The past fire chief of the town I live in now, when he retired, got hired there to be their fire chief on that campus or for
Yep.
their buildings. And they brought us in, and I was able to do a demonstration, and they ended up subscribing to Inspect Point. But that relationship only occurred because I knew some folks through the fire department, and we had been communicating prior to his retirement, and that encouraged him. When we also got another call from another local manufacturer called Global Foundries, I met with their ERC team, their emergency response team, and that
Mhm.
team had been given some assignments that involve inspections of fire protection systems beyond other, certain tests and inspections that they
Yep.
do that are adjacent to that. I would say met with 8 to 10 guys, and I think almost all of them, if not all of them, are
Right.
volunteer firefighters up in
Right.
the Saratoga County area. And so we got
Yep.
talking about that. Of course, we knew a lot of folks in common. And then, I mean, that's a regular occurrence where, these are very adjacent industries,
Yep.
firefighting and fire protection. Of course, I mean, how many times have I gone on fire alarms, right? And you
Yep.
have to go to the panel, or you have to know what a zone is. You have to be able to read the
Yep.
map to understand it. What type of
Yep.
device are you looking at? Same thing with sprinkler systems, right? If you get a flow alarm or something like that. So these are all, obviously there's a lot of cross pollination between um, firefighting and fire protection.
Yeah. Yeah. They enhance each other, right? And fire protection's there to save lives, get people out of the building. It's there to protect the property too, right? And thing is, it just enhances the firefighters, right? It initially knocks down the fire or sometimes puts it out. The thing is, firefighters are still needed to come in, make sure everything's set, because those systems aren't it's just initial kind of knockdown of the fire, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
I mean, I'll give you two examples. I mean, the residential fire sprinklers, we don't have a lot of those in our district just yet. But as we all know, the residential fire sprinklers, as they come on board, because there are groups and organizations promoting that for New York to require it. Obviously, there's the other side that doesn't want that. It'll probably end up somewhere in the middle. Um, but it'll allow people to get out in a safe amount of time.
yeah,
And that's the whole concept: protect life and property, stabilize the incident, right? That's what we want to accomplish on the fire ground. So the concept there is let them get out of the house for residential. For commercial, I mean, we've even seen um, an e-bike catch fire.
yeah,
So I know, we had been talking about, you and I before this, about the NFSA sprinkler save submission that I meant. We got a call for a structure fire, right? Because there's a building
yep,
on fire. It doesn't have to be a big conflagration. Okay.
yep,
We show up, and it's an e-bike, right? We know it's an e-bike. We're told it's an e-bike. We get into basically what's sort of like a community room
right,
for this apartment complex in our district. The single sprinkler head above that particular e-bike in that storage unit contained the fire. It allowed us to set up, right? So we set up a
yeah,
primary and a secondary hand line, right? Obviously, if it gets bigger than that, we're going to take action. But the
right,
sprinkler flowing contained it. Nothing else went off.
yep,
And then we basically just sat back and wait for the local hazmat unit to get there to take care and properly dispose of it. So, I mean, fire protection systems, keeping them in working order, keeping them up to date, keeping them modern, the proper and
yep,
appropriate service on inspections, testing, and maintenance, that's critical to supporting what it is we do. We should be the last line of defense as the fire
right,
department. Things should only
yep,
have gone wrong enough for us to be there, right? Otherwise, if you have a fire alarm, if you have, fire sprinklers, extinguishers, right? I
yep,
mean, how critical can a portable fire extinguisher be in an instance where you have, some sort of small fire that can be extinguished prior to it getting larger? So,
yep.
again, not only cross pollination, but they just work well together, the fire
They do.
protection systems in the fire department.
Yeah. Yeah. Funny enough, you mentioned that. I was talking with the guys at Amrex the other day. Great, obviously, extinguisher
Oh, yeah.
manufacturer, suppression manufacturer, and one piece of data that I think a lot of times fire alarms, there's data on that within the fire ecosystem, like how often fire panels are going off, how much the remote central stations alerting you, right? There's data around how often that's happening. There's also data around, when sprinklers are going off. We're trying to collect more data in the industry of like, hey, when you reported, if you did not report that sprinkler putting out that e-bike fire, that might have not have gotten grabbed, right? So we got to, like, as an industry, start grabbing more of that data. All right, obviously fire alarms there because it's digitally recorded, but the sprinkler systems, and when I was talking with Amrex, they don't know how often a fire extinguisher is in use, right? Because that's a manual you're putting out a fire, you're probably tossing that extinguisher out and get a new one or recharging that. So that part of the industry doesn't know how often they're used, right?
Right.
They're required, definitely commercially, they're really pushed on the residential side, make sure you have extinguishers and working smoke detectors, but there's no data around that. And anyway, by you reporting that sprinkler incident, is critical to just learning more about how well these systems are doing. So,
right. And plus, I think it's a great thing that the sprinkler organizations like the NFSA, this was specifically their sprinkler saves, email distribution. We've communicated it to other, things like that have been communicated. I think, does Viking have like a sprinkler saves as well?
Yeah, I think they have sprinklersaves.com. They started that when I was there working for Viking. And it was really what obviously you could log it, but it was essentially it pulled news feeds from around the U.S. of all the different saves. Now, if it's not reported, it's not going to pull it. And yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so obviously the promotion of operable sprinkler systems, fire alarm systems, and the proper usage of fire extinguishers and kitchen hoods, right? I mean, how many people, as wild as it might seem, because also I've worked in restaurants, right, as a kid, right? You worked as a cook and server and bartender, all that. How many people would know? I can't remember any time at any restaurant I worked at where if there was a proper kitchen hood, how many people know that within, I don't know how many feet it's supposed to be, but right nearby is going to be a handle. You can pull ours in the fire department, you pull and you twist it, or you twist and you pull it, and it'll activate the kitchen hood system if it's not already activated. Right. And this kind of information, not only that they exist, but how they impact your regular and daily life. Right. I mean, that's what our customers at Inspect Point are doing. Right. I mean, that sort of gives me, honestly, it feels to me a little bit of the juice I get from just being here is that we're contributing to something that is meaningful, and that might sound, I don't know how it sounds, but I mean, that's how I feel about it, is that the people we're talking to are for-profit companies. Oftentimes, a lot of times they're facilities management, but either way, they're contributing to the preservation of life and property through the proper operation and maintenance of fire protection systems. And I mean, I think that's a critical thing to focus on, and then being able to highlight that they work on a regular basis when they do well and why, right? Because when they don't do well, then you got a bigger problem, right? So, that's an important thing.
Design, traditionally design and getting them into buildings was the big thing, right? But, if you're not maintaining this, you install this, sometimes it could be pretty expensive to get it installed with the fire alarm system and suppression system, all that, right? And if you're not maintaining that on the correct frequencies, all that money is just tossed out the window, right? And it's there for a reason. Going back to your lithium-ion battery scooter or e-bike fire, how are you guys being trained on the ground and for lithium-ion battery fires? And I guess it probably depends on what size battery and all that, but do you guys have a protocol, or has that changed over the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, we regularly do a drill in my fire department where we'll invite in like heavy equipment and machinery. So the local transportation agency, CDTA, for instance, will bring over one of their electric buses, right? We'll also have like a Tesla there, although we haven't been able to get anybody from Tesla yet to train us, but you'll have somebody there that knows about the wiring underneath, or even the e-bikes. And really, most of it boils down to, if things are on fire, we're going to put water, right? Put the blue on the
Yep.
red. When
Yep.
it comes to e-bikes specifically, once the fire is contained and at least extinguished or maintained to such an extent that it's not expanding, we're going to get the hazmat department involved, right? So the
Yep.
faster we can get, when I say the faster we can get away from it, what I mean is like the quicker we can put the blue on the red and then get the hazmat team in there, really to take care of that. That's the whole goal.
Yep.
And it's
Yep.
a big deal. I mean, we live in a bedroom community of about 12 to 13,000 people. We have 2 fire departments, right? So I'm in the North Greenwich Fire District. There's the DeFriesville Fire Department and the Winenskill Fire Department. My department alone probably runs about 450, 500 calls a year. A lot of what are called smells and bells. I would say probably about 10% of our calls are for things on fire, whether in our district or a neighboring district. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because, as a sort of bedroom community sandwiched between 2 cities here in the Northeast, as was everywhere in the United States, rental and condo housing, townhouses, I mean, that's what's being built. I mean, I think we have 2 or 3 projects having been approved already in the town. That's just
Yep.
going to mean more people of a generation that have e-bikes, to have
Right.
these devices. I mean, just look at anything that you can put in your house now as well, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
concept is that with that is it's becoming much more of a critical need for the fire department to understand. And thankfully, we do a good job. We have a number of, longtime firefighters. Everybody's hooked up with the fire service somehow, whether paid or career in our department, meaning we can stay ahead of a lot of the training or in touch with a lot of what needs to get done. We run a very tight professional operation. I mean, I regularly say I'm lucky because you hear a lot of, unfortunately, you hear some not so great stories. Our department doesn't happen to fall into that category. We're a pretty well run department. One of those things is making sure we're prepared to know how
Yep.
to respond to these types of situations in addition to everything else. But yeah, I mean, where do you go on an electric bus to isolate
Yep.
the power source or to identify it, right? On one of the buses, it's going to be in the back of the bus, right? You might go
Yep.
on thinking it's in the front. So there's a lot of things like that that we are training on regularly.
Yep.
That is a focus for us, and that thankfully we know how to handle.
Yeah, well, I think one of the big things I learned this past summer, FDNY and FDNY has a lot of data on lithium-ion battery fires, and over the last 5 years, it's been a pretty serious issue. A lot of it's their delivery service. There's a lot of e-bikes, and there's a lot of illegal operations where these e-bikes are being charged and whatever. So they've had issues, and they actually, I think the results from 2024 were pretty positive for the FDNY. But one of the things that they talked about, you have your EV cars and things like that, but those are pretty high technology, higher priced, right? They have software built into them. The biggest culprits is your electric scooters, your e-bikes, even
Yep.
your little like toys, right? And a lot of it has to do with not listed, not UL listed, or not approved charging, right? Or the battery packs, right? They're illegal battery packs. So if you're using anything lithium ion, I am obviously hyper focused on this because I'm in the fire industry, but I'm hyper focused on I don't leave the batteries the batteries on the charger. I make sure it's an approved charger. The CEO of Viking, right? James Gollenville, I mentioned earlier, he had a fire. Everybody got out fine, but it was lithium-ion battery fires. So the CEO of one of the biggest sprinkler companies in the world, right? And so nobody's immune to this.
Right.
So you just got to be conscious of it.
And not specifically about lithium-ion batteries, but I think there's an important point you made that I want to highlight, which is to know where you're buying from and know who you're buying from. And the reason I'm saying not about lithium-ion batteries is my brother, right, went on Amazon, bought I think he got smoke detectors for his house, and I think he even got some extinguishers. They show up, and I'm not as hyper focused as you are because this is something that you have a background in every day, all day. But as far as fire protection, I was checking them out to see if they were just what they were. They were a brand I hadn't heard of. And I'm looking at them like, there's no UL listing on these. Like there's nothing there was like some other agency that is not based domestically here in the States anyways. And I was like, dude, you can't use these. I was like, these are not something that you want to take advantage of. He bought cheap instead of good. He got what he got. Thankfully, he returned them and got better quality of both types of things. But yeah, I mean, you have to know where you're buying from. And if you're going to buy things that have lithium-ion battery, make sure at least it comes from a manufacturer that's a brand name or reputable.
Yeah, I have a lot of stuff's going lithium-ion these days, so it's tough. So back to your kind of, I guess your volunteer firefighting, and you mentioned to me of like, because I had this idea of like, all right, if you knew a lot about firefighting before you got involved in Inspect Point, you learned a lot about fire protection systems, but I've always thought like it'd be cool to bring the knowledge transfer from the fire protection over to firefighting, and then vice versa, firefighting on the fire protection side to see what they're interacting with every day. And a lot of people in the industry know that, but I was like, there's like a training or learning opportunity between kind of both segments. And I know you guys need to do training every year. So any ideas there?
Yeah, I mean, we're required to have at least 104 hours worth of training a year, right? So basically, it's the same standard the paid departments are held to. And yeah, we do a lot of. I mean, my department specifically is known as a FAST department for our mutual aid agencies. So it's firefighter assist search team, or firefighter fire rescue and search. I forget the specific acronym, but basically, if we show up to an event and something happens where they have to send in a team to extract a firefighter who's found themselves in a difficult position, that's part of what we would do, and everybody sort of trains on that. But that's sort of one of our primary things. The reason I'm mentioning that is because we train on that a lot. What we don't train on a lot necessarily at this point in time, and we have had training on it, is what is a sprinkler system, right?
Yep.
So I'll give you an example of why that matters. A large insurance company, a national brand, has a server farm in our district. If we get any call for that particular building, and it's a 5-story building, I mean, I would say it's, maybe the length of a football field, 5-story tall.
Yep.
It's a big building, right? So it's not very tall, but it is very wide. We're required, prior to entering under, now it's a canopy, I think it's like 30 or 40 feet, we're required to be on air prior to getting under that to go in, because it could be a situation where there's been, a CO system has been activated, right? Or some other system that would deprive us of oxygen, right? Does anybody know why, though? Like, does anybody in my department, and I'm sure people do, obviously, but I guess what I'm saying is you might look at any department and say, do they know what's actually in there? Do they know what halogen is? Do they know why you would use CO2, right? Do they know, right, when these certain other types of systems would be used? Or alternatively, we show up to a fire alarm. What is a zone node and loop? Why does it matter? How does it map you to the problem, right? We had a flow alarm couple years ago. A sprinkler head had frozen and popped off. Okay. In a local retirement community, the vestibule, the heat turned off, the sprinkler head froze and popped off. Right now, I seem to remember it was like, and you'll know more about this than me, but I seem to remember it was like orange PVC pipe. It felt like.
Yeah, it's CPVC. Yeah.
CPVC. Yeah.
Blaze Master.
Was it?
It's called. There's a trade name's Blaze Master, but there's a couple different brands.
Yeah, gotcha. So I just remember that, and it had frozen and popped off, right? So when we get there, there's not only a sheet of ice, right, but the alarms are going off. There was water going, actually. So we had to send a few of us around the back to get to the sprinkler room because this vestibule bisected the building. So rather than go through it, we had to go around, and it was like 2 feet of snow, too. It was kind of annoying. Well, thankfully, one of the guys works for a mechanical contractor because we got in, and he knew right where to turn it off, right? Now, I would have known where to go eventually, right? Because I do this every day and I talk about it and I've seen it before. But his ability to get right to that, to turn it off, was only a component both of the training that he's received in the volunteer fire service in the past, but also the fact that he does this for a living.
Yeah.
Right? How many of our new guys, right? And we're blessed to have new men and women who have volunteered for the fire department. How many of them would know that at this point? Now they're brand new, right? So they're just learning how to put, like I say, the blue on the red stuff and the appropriate and safe ways to do that. But as they
Yep.
grow in their career, when is that going to take place, right? Now,
Yep.
for our department, obviously that's in our control, but that's not a standard the volunteer or any fire service has regularly. And it's important because those things are there to protect us too. We go in, it's meant to protect us, you know?
Yep. 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 Yeah, and I think there's an opportunity for local fire protection companies, right, that use Inspect Point and everybody else, right, to just talk to your local volunteer. Go in. It's kind of fun too, right? You might get a nice meal out of it.
Yeah,
Go
yeah,
in, an hour every quarter, right, and just have different people go and just chat about new technology and just share ideas. So.
yeah. For something that we encounter every day, both as civilians and in the fire service anyway. And plus, believe it or not, 2 hours a week for 52 weeks a year. I mean, there's a lot of ideas, and we always have drill. I mean, there's always stuff for us to learn more about or sharpen our skills on, right?
Yeah.
Because even though you've tapped the hydro once, you keep doing it until it's muscle memory, until you can do it in your sleep.
Yep.
With that being said, variety is good too. And I guarantee if a sprinkler, fire alarm company, even an extinguisher company reaches out and says, here's how to train people on extinguishers, right? They're going to welcome that because not only is it a change of pace, right? It takes a little bit of work out of their day because they don't have to plan for a drill in a particular day or week, right? And it's important, right? Just having a knowledge of where and why these things are there and who controls them, right? We know a lot about building codes, right? We know about the type, we train on the types of construction, right? You have to know the difference between type 1 and 3 and 5 and what's going to burn, or balloon construction, right?
Yep.
Where's the fire going to go? We train a lot on fire behavior, right?
Yep.
Airflow, directing a particular, reading the smoke. I mean, these are all things that, obviously we're talking about fire protection systems, but those are all things that are a component of understanding fire processes, which would simply just be another version of that. In my fire department, we're lucky. Again, I'm very proud to be a member of this department because it is just a good department. Everybody there is real high quality, real trained up and motivated. We're even asked, for instance, to go in the opposite direction, right? We're asked by our community, the 42nd Infantry Division of the Army. They have a unit in our department as protection area. We'll go there once a year to train them on the extinguishers, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, I think anybody listening to this podcast, if you're a fire protection professional that isn't in the fire service, consider joining. But two, if you have a fire department nearby, give them a call. Offer to do an hour's worth of training on what a sprinkler system is, how how a fire alarm control panel operates.
Yep.
Guaranteed they're going to at least be interested. Plus, they're probably really good people, right? I mean, they're just always they're great people like you. They got a job, right? They're doing something else during the day, and then this is something else they've commit to. Like we all have secondary activities. I hope a lot of people are involved in, so they'll gladly take somebody else doing a little bit of their work for part of the time.
No, that's great. I think it's a good promotion to do, and during our talk here, I have to have another podcast on this because it's I don't even know if you know about this, Jeff, but it got released. The New York Post put a piece. In New York State is trying to propose sprinkler bill again. All these states try to do it all the time, and the home builders bash it. And this New York Post thing was like, oh, they're going to require fire sprinklers in homes for any new build. It's not old buildings; anything newly built, right? And they were quoting $30,000 to $40,000 a year to put in a residential sprinkler system, and that's absolutely absurd. So there's the Post is the Post, right? The media is the media. So, the New York State legislature is promoting this bill, right? I think it's great for the safety of our community, right? It's great for the firefighters because they're safer going to a new construction with a lot more flammable materials than stuff was built a long time ago.
Oh yeah.
And the cost of a residential sprinkler system for a 1 or 2 family home is not even close to $30,000-$40,000. It's like the cost of a granite countertop. It's
Sure.
probably five to 15 grand of a, $300,000 house. And it might not even be that, right? So I don't know. That's come out recently. I'm probably going to do a whole podcast on it, but it's sad to see. Whatever. There's different interests out there. The home building, they don't want to give up more cost to their home. I just add the price onto it.
Right.
I just don't understand. A lot of states have it. Maryland's got it. I think California's got it. South Carolina weirdly has a law. And it's new homes. It's not, if you're buying a new home, like spend 5 to 10 grand to protect that building and your family. I really don't understand the negative aspects. And I guess the home builders just don't care, and it's going to affect their bottom line. But
Right. I mean, in a district like ours, we have new houses being built all the time where there's parcels, and then you get, one of 3 houses you can choose from, right? And they'll build that model with certain modifications.
yeah,
But if you talk to that couple and say, hey, for an extra 3 to 4 grand, would you want a sprinkler system whose design is to allow you to escape? It's not meant to actually put out the fire. It's meant to give you an opportunity to get out of the building, right?
Yep.
But by virtue of the fact it's water, it's going to have some fire extinguishment competency,
totally.
right? And so also, would you like to save the things you've worked hard to put into this house that you built, maybe heirlooms and things like that? And, talk to any, and who's building these properties. It's not usually, it's of a generation where, perhaps they're just starting families, right? Recently married, starting families, young kids. You look at any mother and father and say, hey, your room is going to be 15 feet down the hallway, maybe from where your baby or your kids sleep. Would you want a sprinkler in between to protect that area so you can get them and get out? It's almost common sense in some sense for what you're going to get, right? And then your insurance company, right, just to put that in, and how are they not going to love it?
I don't know. And insurance got to get a little bit more involved in that. I know there's, if there's an issue with a system and it breaks and then there's a claim or whatever, but overall, like it should reduce the cost of our entire society for fire, right? Because I don't know. It's just short-sighted in my opinion.
All you have to do is go to YouTube and look at, any organization that's done a side-by-side burn of like a room, what's called a room and contents fire, right? They have these trailers and they'll put in things that are as they were manufactured 100 years ago, where there were more natural organic carbon materials, right? Versus, today's modern synthetic, right? Materials. They'll start a fire at the same time. And it's not even close. The fire spreads a lot faster. The smoke is a lot blacker because you're getting what are called ethyl methyl bad stuff. I think NFPA does probably the one that's the most popular that I've seen. And the fire starts at the same time. And, if my memory serves me correctly, you're like 7-8 minutes into the fire. And whereas the fire is getting pretty bad on the side with furniture and things that were, of 100 years ago. The room on the right is, it's what we would call a surround and drown. We wouldn't even go into that environment unless it were required to protect somebody's life.
Flash over everything, ignites in the room.
That would be bad. So, residential sprinklers, to my mind, make sense. I'm not fully informed on all the policy angles, so I don't want to be seen as like saying that it should get done or shouldn't. But I think it makes sense for sure, just from a common sense logic.
It's a political. Home builders have more money, essentially. But I'm going to do a piece on it because near and dear to my heart, because it's in New York State. So anyway, Jeff, this has been awesome. I guess we're going pretty long here. I could talk to you for hours.
Man, we could keep doing.
You got anything for me? Any questions for me? I never turn it around that way, but.
Well, one question I had for you, Drew, is, with your background, actually very similar, right? You had a background in fire protection, right? Now engineering, right? You went to RPI, you had an engineering background, but you were working for Viking, right? Is that right? Or you were working for Tyco at the time?
I got hired out of school with Tyco. Manufactured the dry valve, didn't really know what a dry valve did, know how to put it together, knew the components of it, obviously. I moved around Tyco. I was actually the environmental health and safety and fire manager for one of their plants. So obviously all the OSHA rules, but all the fire safety rules that we had, right, in that factory. So funny enough, we weren't making fire protection equipment there, but again, we had to do annually and quarterly inspections, and that was under my operation at the time. And then I moved around, got into the fire sprinkler pipe side out in Arizona, and then worked my way into New York City and the fire suppression side, sprinklers suppression, and working with the FDNY a lot, and Nassau County and upstate and New York. So yeah, it's always been fire, weirdly enough, and
Right.
I don't have any ties to the firefighting community back then. Obviously, I do now.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of it's been a great industry and great career.
But how has that engineering background, that process and build background, right, really informed how you guys led the product to where it is today? I do a lot of demonstrations, obviously. Inspect point is, people say, oh, wow, that just makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And maybe some of that has a little bit to do with how I understand them and I show them the product, but I couldn't show them something. I couldn't make sense out of something that doesn't make sense, right? If it were black and white like that. So how do you think that engineering and process background helped you sort of guide the product to where it is today? Because I mean, it is incredibly well organized, and it's the workflow that business operators, right? But that comes from an engineering, of course, software development background, right? I mean, there's folks there as well, right? You would shout out to Pat and Phil, and don't want to leave Jen out, right? You can't have people that are supported and customers leaving that. But how do you think that engineering background informed like the build of a fire protection software?
Yeah, my background is manufacturing industrial engineering, so I got a Six Sigma black belt within Tyco. So that's like process improvement, right? So looking at a current state of how you do a business operation or manufacturing process, and I'm not cutting the fat out, but just optimizing that workflow to make it either more profitable or making it more compliant. So I think that background of industrial engineering and process improvement, you look at a certain process, hey, where could we improve this, right? And with Inspect Point, it was like compliance is number one, right? But if we can drive deficiencies, which then drive revenue, which then drive the rest of that reoccurring revenue model, that's huge. And it has been for the last 10 to 15 years, is that service and inspection model. And it's highly looked at in the industry. So it was really great timing. But you look at pieces of that process and where it breaks down. So that's all part of that kind of Six Sigma and lean mentality. And change management is implementing a new process or a better process. And what are the key stakeholders, right? It's those technicians, it's the fitters, it's the field team. That's the critical part. The back office is, I would say, 1A, because they're a critical part of that too. So if you can improve on their daily lives and daily tasks, make it easier for them, everything just is much better workflow down the line, right?
Right.
So you get the data, you get it out to the customer, your customer's happy, everything's compliant, everything's fixed, and you're making money. So it's like, you focus on those key components to the beginning of the process, and then again, continuously improving that too. And Inspect Point's been great at that. Is every month we want to hear the feedback from our customers, and we put that in the loop into our product and really focus on the fire protection industry, which
Absolutely.
Not a lot of other companies out there are fully focused on fire like us.
No. But here's the benefit of all that, aside from you just built a great company, and I honestly wake up, I do love being here. It's just a great company. It's a great product, great culture here. But here's the thing, when you focus on a common sense process, and that's why I'm asking, because that engineering background, I'm not a nice at level anything, right? I can take an axe to a door or a saw to a roof, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. But people in between where we're at in terms of skill level, right, which is a lot of fire protection contractors who understand these things and more, they're able to get into the product and use it pretty easy. And I think that's where I think the part of the software excels within the industry that we serve, is that the people we're talking to use tools all the time, you know.
Mhm.
And it's just, again, it's the difference between a nail gun and a hammer, you know.
Yep.
If you're using a hammer and you want to use a nail gun, there's a product out there for you, and that's what Inspect Point is. We're the nail gun in that instance. And so I think that engineering, that's why I asked, because I've always sort of been curious about, you know, was the process intentional? And it always felt like it was, that this was just a built over time intentional platform for that. So the only other question I have for you is, when are we going to get you into the volunteer fire service? Are you going to call
I
right after this
know.
podcast and
Yeah,
offer to join, you know?
I talk to the chief occasionally in our town, and he knows who I am, so it's like just a matter of time. I don't know if I want to be running to any two alarm fires or anything anytime soon. I think I'm
Right.
probably a little too old for that, but I could probably add some value to help with just the overall. There's a lot happening with like compliance engine here in the state of Connecticut, so I would like to see that more involved, because even my kids' school, or boys' school, it's only like 5-year-old school. It's not even that they don't have sprinklers in there. Like, how is that not in the building code? It's absurd. There's a great security system, great fire alarm system, but there's no sprinkler system. It's kind of
How old
wild.
is the building?
It's only 5 years old. So, I mean, that's a building code issue, but
Huh.
anyway.
Well, we'd love to have you, Drew.
Thanks,
And
Jeff.
you know what? It'd be good for the boys, right? So they can get on the trucks, and I'm sure your department has a fire protection day community like we do.
Oh,
but
they're really active. Yeah.
cool, man.
Well, thanks again, Jeff, and we'll get this out here end of February. So
Yeah,
appreciate
no
all
problem.
the time
Thanks
today.
again. Yep, absolutely. Appreciate you having me on. Thank you, Drew.
This was episode 76 of the Fire Protection Podcast, powered by Inspect Point. I want to thank again Jeff Pirro for coming on and going into everything kind of on the firefighting side, and kind of bringing that over to fire protection, what we do within our industry. So, during the episode, I had ideas for other episodes of kind of some of these new residential sprinkler bills. So that'll probably be the next episode coming out here shortly. So again, thank you for all the support, and see you again soon. Take care.